The War of the Gods is in the past, and now Lin Feng could be at peace with his wife and daughter. Everything seemed fine until Lin finds out that they are being bullied. He feels useless without being able to do anything since he is in a deep sleep in a wheelchair. The story begins with a little girl swinging the swing. This child is the daughter of our main character Lin Feng. She told her father that her teacher asked him why he didn't go to the meeting. So she warned the teacher that her father was an ancient god of war, but due to his injuries he could no longer move and was paralyzed in a wheelchair. Because of this, his daughter was often bullied. His wife also suffered some teasing and his daughter had to watch her secretly cry at night. The girl really wanted Lin to regain consciousness as soon as possible. Lin saw her daughter's tears as she looked at him hopefully. Suddenly, the girl had to move away from her father when a boy her age appeared next to her and shouted that she was crying again. The girl didn't intend to leave her mess, but the bully looked at her with contempt and said the rumors that the girl's mother took advantage of a crippled man. Such disgusting and untrue words made Ray very angry. So she immediately jumped off the swing and approached Zhou Xiaohu. The girl was furious and yelled at the aggressor that if he dared to insult her parents again, he would receive a punishment because of Ray's reaction. The bully pushed her to the ground. Xiaohu was bigger than the girl, so the push was quite strong. In addition, there was still a swing behind her, and the girl hit her head. The bully rejoiced in the pain of others and even spat on the little girl. Ray felt helpless and held the grass in his hands angrily. While Xiaohu said that she was a small animal, in the end the girl couldn't stand the insults and as she attacked the guy biting her hand. The bully's parents were nearby and when the boy's mother saw that her son was being attacked, she hurried to intervene. The woman kicked Ray and shouted that the girl was a brute who had no education. Ray found herself on the ground again, but now she looked angrily at the woman who was behaving worse than her son. This woman picked the girl off the ground, ignoring her screams, and carried her towards Xiaohu. After the woman let go of Ray, she started screaming for the girl to kneel down and immediately apologize. Our protagonist was sitting in a wheelchair, and his internal energy began to boil from such injustice to his daughter. Anger and the desire to protect filled the man as he looked at Ray. The daughter didn't understand why she should apologize to the boy who started cursing him. At that moment, Xiaohui's father intervened in this fight. The man grabbed the girl by the ponytail and pulled hard, ordering her to apologize to his son. Ray continued to resist the two adults and received a lap from the woman. Xiaohu's mother looked at the girl as if she was nothing but trash and asked if she was sure of her words. The protagonist's daughter knew well that her opponents were far superior, but she stubbornly refused to bow to them. Suddenly, Xiaohu's father waved his hand at Ray and shouted that he would teach her a good lesson today. But to the great surprise of all parties to the conflict, the protagonist stopped the man's hand. Lin held the man and asked him how he dared to touch his daughter. On that day, our hero finally regained his powers and declared that from now on anyone who touched his daughter would be beheaded. Initially, Xiaohu's father was feeling superior, but now it seemed that his life was hanging by a thread. From that day on, Lin had no intention of allowing anyone to humiliate his family. He pinned the guy to the ground while Xiaohu and the mother watched helplessly. The woman was very worried about her husband and tried to figure out how she could help him. Then she went to Lin and beat him, screaming not to dare to touch her husband. The woman even threatened, saying that she would call the police immediately. Lin did not allow the woman to finish her threat because she was thrown back by the force with which he slapped her. At that moment, she fell on the grass and Lin reminded her that she hit her daughter. The hero was filled with rage and ordered them to remember this day because he spared their lives. Despite the fact that they messed with his daughter, Lin begins to remember his battles. He fought alone against a large number of soldiers. The last warrior was breathing hard and his whole body was covered in abrasions. The protagonist unexpectedly heard someone say that he could single-handedly motivate an army of 10,000 people. Lin quickly turned his gaze to his voice and saw that more warriors were landing in front of him. They say they wouldn't let the protagonist win so easily. One of the soldiers looked at Lin and admitted that he was really worthy of the title, but today he is destined to depart at the hands of the 7 sons of the Western Alliance. Such a confident statement from his opponents made Lin smile slightly, after which he raised his spear and shouted that he had been fighting for 6 years and did not think he should be afraid of them. The leader of the Western Alliance hastened to attack him. The warriors had different types of weapons and jumped, giving him no chance to survive. But Lin dodged the blade. Unfortunately, the handle of the spear hit her body. The protagonist was still able to throw out one of the members of the Western Alliance with the help of his spear. The leader had a weapon in his hands and was behind the prota. He was sure that it would deal him a fatal blow. Lin had to act very quickly to repel someone else's attack. The spear pierced the enemy's body. The leader began to pour red liquid from his mouth. He himself could not believe that such a thing was possible. Lin explained to the enemy that he was very weak, and even with an army of 10,000 people, he would not move him a meter back. At this moment, the 3 remaining members of the alliance were only a meter away. Lin immediately made several cuts and told the warriors to blame themselves for the loss. Lin's spear movements were so fast and confident that the warriors didn't even have time to react. Only at the last moment did they understand that now the end would come for them, and there was nothing they could do with Lin's strong blows. At this moment, the protagonist again stood alone on the battlefield and believed that if it brought order to the country, then everything would be calm at home. After the active part of the fighting ended, the protagonist realized that he was very injured. Lin's eyes were closing, but he knew that he could not leave because his daughter still needed a bone marrow transplant. At that moment, he returned to the present by the voice of Ray, who constantly called to him and clung to his father's legs. The man was very happy to see his daughter. He held Ray in his arms, and the girl could not believe that this was really her father. The protagonist promised to eliminate Xiaohu's entire family if they did not bow 100 times. The family quickly bowed, and with each bow they apologized, saying that they had made a mistake. Ray cried loudly when he said that everyone around him hated his father, but the protagonist promised that he would no longer allow them to harm his family. Ray continued to cry and complain that no one believed her about Lin being a hero. The man heard his daughter but was distracted when he realized that her body had not fully recovered. Lin was upset and knew he needed to wake up to protect the family. The girl immediately noticed that it was difficult for her father and asked him to let her downstairs. Like, obeyed and carefully placed the girl on the ground. The hero tried to convince her that she was fine. He stroked her head and called her to go home. At that moment, Ray told her that her grandmother kicked them out of the house and forbade them to return home because her mother had to talk to Uncle Sun. The protagonist frowned and realized that there was some kind of catch on this. Ray leaned over to his father and whispered to him to pretend to be asleep again. Lin smiled at his daughter and said that she suggested a good idea. Then the man went back to the wheelchair to carry out his plan. Ray immediately started screaming that he went back to being like this because Xiaohu's family assaulted him. Ray turned to the frightened couple and said that he was going after his uncle, and then it would be the end. The girl began to push her father towards the house, and Xiaohu's parents believed that they wanted to demand compensation from them for the damages of the platform. After some time, the protagonist and his daughter finally met in front of the main entrance of the house. There was a blonde woman in the hallway who was very unhappy with her appearance, so she immediately left, insulting Ray. She reminded the little girl that she didn't allow her to bring Lin back until she called them. Ray hid behind the wheelchair and bravely admitted to her grandmother that she and her father were very tired. The woman didn't want to listen to her and angrily ordered her to shut up. Then she pointed to Lin and yelled at Ray not to dare to call this cripple his father. The girl continued to insist that she would call him father. Suddenly, Ray heard a strange male voice that said it would be an honor for him to spend his life with Sin. After that, the tall man left the house. The protagonist became gloomy when his daughter whispered that that man was the one from Uncle Sun that her mother had spoken to. The protagonist's wife was called Xin. She was a young and beautiful girl who seemed upset. She said that she wanted to consider her marriage proposal. Sun allowed the girl to think about it a little more, but he was confident that he would make a good impression on her. Sun turned around and saw that a girl and a man were standing in the yard right in front of him. He realized that that girl was Sin's daughter. So Sun went down to the girl and started patting her cheeks, saying how cute the girl was. At that moment, Shin's mother told her to accompany Sun to the door, but the protagonist's wife refused. Ray's grandmother ran after the man to find out how the meeting went, leaving her daughter upset. Ray, after observing the situation, whispered to his father that this man wanted to steal Shin from them. At that moment, the mother came to Ray, so with all care and tenderness she took her little hands. Sin thanked Ray for taking care of her father today. The little girl started to cry and asked her mother if she was really looking for a new father. But Ixin promised that this would not happen. While wiping her daughter's tears, she noticed a mark on her face. Then the woman asked if her daughter had really fought with someone again. The girl didn't want to bother her mother, so she lied, saying that she ended up falling. After that, Sin took the protagonist and his daughter home. After returning to the house, Ray was sent to his room and his parents were left alone. Sin sat on the bed in front of Lin and tried to figure out what was the right thing to do in this situation. The protagonist was wondering if his wife knew that he had woken up. At that moment, his wife says that she knew that he cannot hear her and is not conscious, but she wanted to tell him something. These words of the girl made Lin worry even more. At that moment, he had to make an effort not to give himself up. Sin gently stroked her husband's hair and said with tears in her eyes that Ray was saved when he sacrificed himself, but she wanted her daughter to have a strong and happy family. At this moment, Shin reveals with tears in her eyes that she was ready to marry Sun if he treated their daughter well. It wasn't easy for Shin to make this decision, but now that she told her husband, she felt that she remained honest with the person she loved the most. Then she stood up and sincerely apologized to the protagonist, who continued to sit silently in the chair. Shin started to leave. Meanwhile, Lin thought that his wife had been through a lot during the whole time he was away in deep sleep. Suddenly, a loud knock was heard on the other side. The guy realized that he wasn't alone in the room. And Shin's younger sister came out of the bathroom and said that Lin had no idea that his wife was getting married. The protagonist didn't expect to see his sister-in-law in his room, and although he didn't react to her words externally, he was tense inside. His sister-in-law's name is Jiang. she approached the protagonist's wheelchair and then threw the wet towel. She grabbed Lin by the chin and lamented that such a handsome man could not be used. Soon a melody began to play in the room that distracted Jiang from looking at his brother-in-law. At that moment, the girl lay on the bed and greeted the future brother-in-law. Jiang accepted the call and his feet were in front of Lin's body. Remembering that the sister-in-law was still naked, but the protagonist diverted the girl's attention and began to listen to the conversation. Sun asked Jiang if her sister had accepted the gifts, but the girl replied no. However, she added that her sister sooner or later would be all Sun's. But it seems that Sun didn't believe much in it, so he invited Jiang to buy whatever she wanted. That was all the girl wanted. So she immediately demanded a bag and a pair of shoes. Sun promised to give her everything she wanted if she did something for him. Jiang agreed and went to her sister's closet. She promised that she would do anything Sun said. She dressed in a blouse and asked her future brother-in-law to change Jin's wardrobe when they got married. After that, the girl left the room and Lin was alone, sitting in the center of the room. The protagonist considered what he had heard. It was difficult for him to accept that Sin needed to marry this man to give Ray a future. At that moment, Lin's bedroom window was open, and the light wind blew the curtains. Suddenly, a girl appeared in front of the wheelchair. She bowed to the protagonist and said she was happy that he had finally woken up. Lin recognized the girl as Xiao Qing and asked if she shouldn't be guarding the border. The girl, without raising her eyes, admitted that the master is now more important than the border, especially since after their last battle no one dared to breach the border. Lin listened carefully to her subordinate and asked if there was any more news for him. Qing was sad and said that during these 2 years he was surrounded by ill-intentioned and especially those who want to take away his wife. Qing adds that without an order she could not do anything. So now she asked permission to eliminate all the villains. Lin heard her and could barely contain her anger. He realized that while he was recovering, some people had already managed to get closer. However, he was more worried about Sun now. So the protagonist asked the king to bring all the information about him. The girl accepted the big man's order and said that she would immediately start collecting information and bringing it as soon as possible. The subordinate left the room through the window as fast and unnoticed as she had appeared. Then Lin was left alone again, but he didn't have to be alone for a long time because the door opened. Ray happily entered and told his mother that according to the fairy tale, the prince kissed Sleeping Beauty and she woke up. Ray smiled happily at his mother and promised that if she kissed his father, he would also wake up. Shin didn't know how to answer, but she thought seriously about her words and leaned over to her daughter, saying that this was just a fairy tale. The girl knew that her father had already woken up and wanted to make her mother find out that way. So she insisted that her mother kiss her father. Shin didn't believe it would work, but couldn't refuse her daughter. Then she agreed. Then Shin approached her husband and looked carefully at his face. Lin hadn't seen his wife up close for a long time. Shin put all his love into this kiss because in the depths of his soul there was a hope that the guy would wake up. Ray looked through his hand and thought that now Lin would wake up and her mother would jump with happiness. But it was not as she thought, and the protagonist did not react. Sin looked at his daughter and said that daddy did not wake up and this was just a fairy tale. The girl was very upset, and she did not understand why her father did not get up and show Sin that come to her senses. Sin took her daughter's hand and promised that she would find a new father. But Ray was angry because her mother had promised that no one would take Lin's place, so she screamed that her mother is a liar. Then Ray took her father's hand and tried to lift him. She sobbed desperately and begged him to wake up. Sin couldn't look at it without tears. Ray was sure Lin could hear her and begged him to tell his mother that he had already recovered. It was very difficult for the protagonist to pretend he was still asleep, so he mentally apologized to his daughter because he needed to reveal Sun's true nature, and for that he needed to pretend to be unconscious. At that moment, Ray saw that his father was not reacting at all, so she continued to cry while her mother said that maybe Lin would wake up in the future, but now she really needed a father to take care of her. The girl did not agree with this and continued to reach out to her father. The protagonist continued to remain silent, so Ray yelled that he was a liar like his mother. Shin was forced to take his daughter out of the room and asked her not to yell at her father, but Ray couldn't believe that the father would let his mother replace him. After some time, this difficult day was coming to an end. Everything was dark outside. There was a single light on in only one room of the house. Ray managed to fall asleep. There were tears in her eyes, and in her sleep she mumbled that everyone around her was a liar. Sin was sitting next to her daughter and felt terribly guilty for her. At that moment, the door opens and Jiang appeared at the door. She reminded her older sister about the banquet and asked why she was still home. Sin didn't react. Jiang started to pull her hand and insisted that they had to go. Jiang added that after Izan marries Sun, Ray will be able to have whatever he wants. Shin just wanted her daughter to be happy and not sleep with tears in her eyes, so she felt obliged to go. Meanwhile, Lin was still in the room. King appeared through the open window and there was an envelope in the girl's hand. She calls the protagonist a master and said that the information from this Sun was collected. King added that she had collected all the necessary information. After that, she handed over the envelope and reminded that today was Ginzin's birthday. So Sun is hosting a banquet at the Jangzhou Hotel, and the protagonist's wife will be there in about 40 minutes. Lin accepted the information envelope and thanked her subordinate for a job well done. The man opened the envelope and took a stack of papers and began to carefully read its contents. Lin couldn't believe that Sun's family had so many unpleasant methods. Then he started to get up from his wheelchair and ordered Qing to get ready. Lin was going to the birthday party and the girl was going with him. Meanwhile, the young sisters arrived at the hotel in 40 minutes and were greeted politely by a smiling staff member. She asked if the girls came to Mr. Sun's reservation. Jiang confirmed this. The staff member reported that a separate room had been reserved for them. After that, they entered the hall and couldn't believe what they saw. Jiang expressed admiration and asked his older sister to look at the huge arch that wished her a happy birthday, but Xin wasn't so happy. Suddenly, a man adjusted his glasses and said that he was surprised that his father had booked the entire hotel. Jiang quickly found himself next to his future brother-in-law and laughed, saying that he wasn't wrong. At this moment, footsteps were heard in the hotel corridor and the little girl greeted Xin. The child was dressed in a costume and in her hands was a box with a beautiful ring that was meant for the birthday girl. Jiang's eyes lit up when she saw the golden ring with a huge diamond, and she wanted to take a closer look. Sun quickly knelt down and asked Xin to marry him. The hotel staff who watched this scene whispered that Sun's family spared no expense for the engagement. Sun promised the protagonist's wife that he would take care of her and her family. So the man looked at the chosen one and asked if she accepted the proposal. It was very difficult for Xin to make this decision. Her soul was split into two halves and she remained silent. Meanwhile, Qing and the protagonist were sitting near the piano and carefully observed what was going on in the hotel. Qing asked if she should expel that insolent person, but Lin asked her to wait. He looked at his wife and was very worried if she would accept someone else's proposal. At this moment, Xin took his hand away from Sun and said that this was too unexpected for her. The girl reveals that she was worried about who would take care of Lin. Jiang panicked, tried to convince her sister to agree. Sun heard again that the girl needed to think, but this time he had no intention of backing down. The man stood up and began to reproach the girl for her ingratitude. Because he had rented an entire hotel for her and promised to take care of her daughter, Jiang tried to reason with her sister that she should marry him because he was rich and influential, but Xin was very angry because Sun dared to reproach her, so at that moment she refused his offer. After the refusal, the man dared to reach out to her. Xin tried to run away and Sun threatened, saying that if she didn't accept, her family would cease to exist. Sun tried to prove to the girl that she had no choice, but his threats had no effect. So the man whispered that she should be obedient so that her daughter would be taken care of properly. Then he announced that today was her wedding day. The guests began to praise Sun. The protagonist didn't like this attitude towards his wife and told Qing that she would know what to do. In a second, the girl found herself behind Sun. The guy continued to approach Xin, but Qing grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. The girl was furious and ordered the guy to stop. The guards immediately rushed towards Sun, but Sun looked confident and calmed the guards down with a gesture, and then ordered everyone to leave. The man believed that he was stopped by another beauty because she was simply jealous of his fiancée. Then he stroked Qing's cheek and asked if she also wanted to be hugged. The guards watched his actions and laughed, calling Sun talented. At that moment, Qing couldn't tolerate such treatment and hit the man's face, breaking his glasses. Sun couldn't believe what had happened. He grabbed his cheek and ordered his guards to finish this girl. The men immediately obeyed and ran to her, screaming that she didn't understand what she had gotten herself into. The guard was very surprised when he saw that, instead of retreating, the girl put her hand in front of his forehead. Then, with a slight Qing movement, pushed the first attacker away. After that, she also easily neutralized 3 more guards. Without making much effort, the men ended up on the ground. One of the guards looked at the injured colleagues and did not understand how this happened. Sun was furious. He shouted that he was the heir and they were now in his family's territory. Qing looked at him and said that Sun's insignificant family should behave more modestly. At this moment, Xin says she is very interested in finding out who this girl is. Soon Qing approached her and gave her a happy birthday. Xin was very surprised. Suddenly, a very beautiful song started playing in the hotel. A man shouted for everyone to look at the stage. The sisters turned their heads and saw a handsome man sitting at the piano playing a wonderful melody. She couldn't take her eyes off the man and shouted that he was very handsome. But Xin recognized her husband. Qing confirmed that he was her master on the stage. Xin didn't understand why this woman called her husband master. Sun was angry when he saw that someone entered the hotel that was booked by his family. Then he called loudly by the manager. The hotel staff heard his shouts and the manager asked him to call the guards. Soon a large number of men appeared in the main lobby of the hotel. The hotel employee apologized and said they would sort things out soon. Sun felt happy due to the large number of security guards. He was also satisfied, believing that the girl who dared to hit him would get what he deserved. Then Sun pointed to Qing and ordered the guards to take the woman away. However, the men did not listen to his instructions but started to drag him out of the hotel. The man shouted as he tried to leave and explained that he was Sun. The hotel employee smiled at the guy and said that there was a mistake because the one who rented the entire hotel was named Lin. At first, Sun started to act smug, but then he realized in a panic that everything had not gone according to plan. The manager approached Ching and apologized for the mistake, then ordered them to listen to the guests and kick the gentleman out of here.